I'm so excited to open up the animation section of this course. We are slowly arriving at the point where everything we learned until now will start to get used. Before we jump into topics like the graph editor or easing keyframes, I want to show you a few basics about animation in general. There are two types of animation: static animations, which don't use the motion path, animations like that, and spatial animations. When I click on it, I see a motion path here. Let me start from here. I have two different objects here. I want to show you the difference between them and how to navigate through keyframes. I can see there is an animation going on in both of them. So I select both of them and I press U on my keyboard to reveal all the properties which are holding information about the keyframe. I see that the scale and the rotation is adjusted. As I start scrubbing through my timeline, I see the motion between them is different. The first one moves faster, the other one starts slower. As they go along, they both rotate and they end up in the same position. This is because those keyframes are linear set, these are normal keyframes, and those keyframes are eased in and eased out. Easing will be explained in the next lesson, but you get the idea that easing keyframes allows us to change the velocity of any animation. As I place them one over another, you see the keyframes have the same change. They do one big rotation and they are growing a bit bigger to 130%. But the animation itself is different between them. Depending on what kind of style you are aiming for, you either use normal keyframes or you ease them in. Once you are on the timeline, you can add additional keyframes and navigate through keyframes with those options. We can click the left to go to the previous keyframe or the right to go to the next keyframe. You can also set additional keyframes either by clicking on this little diamond or just changing any parameter and a keyframe will be set automatically. You can simply select any keyframe on the timeline and drag it along. There are a bunch of shortcuts which allows us to create some interesting things in After Effects. For example, if I would have more keyframes here, I would have my ready animation, and after I have finished this animation, I see this animation is less than 2 seconds, but I wanted it to be 3 seconds. This would be no problem. I could select all those keyframes, hit the left Alt or Option key, and just drag them out. All the keyframes I have selected would drag onto the composition accordingly to the place I want. They are snapping on uneven places, but that's no problem. You can adjust this by going to each keyframe and clicking once on it and shifting it to the side. Now I would have them perfectly set on frames. Let's go to the spatial movement because this is very, very important. You see I have the same option here. I have eased keyframes and normal keyframes. Now what is different between those animations? The bottom one has the anchor point set on this object and the upper one has the anchor point set on the composition. Both of these animations use the position value, both of these animations go to the same place, but the one above has this in a weird place. That's because I didn't set the anchor point and I made a mistake making this animation. I should click on this first object, go to the pan behind tool and adjust the anchor point right at the beginning while I was setting the keyframes, because now the entire motion is wrong. I would have to select this keyframe and place it somewhere so it would animate properly. This is very hard to manage, and if my timeline is in the middle and I reposition this object, you see the entire motion path has changed. I can use, of course, the Bezier handles to adjust the motion, but it would be difficult to go back to a linear motion. The mistake I have made here, and you will probably also make this mistake often, is that I used the position of this entire layer. If you remember what we talked about properties and shape layers, I should not use the transform options, the basic options. I should go inside of content, open up the ellipse, open up the transform ellipse 1 tools, and the ellipse 1 has its own position settings. So let me adjust this now. I press U, I select the bottom one, let me deselect the upper one. I select the bottom one, I delete its keyframes, and I go to Content, Ellipse, Transform Ellipse, and I use the position only from the ellipse tool, not from the entire shape layer. Now I could go to the beginning, set a position keyframe, go forward, change its position by holding the Shift key to remain on the same axis. I have another keyframe now, and watch what would happen. Right now I have the keyframe selected, so if I would shift it, a new keyframe would appear. But let me go Ctrl Z. If this keyframe is not selected, only the object would be selected. I can shift it around and the same position keyframes would be used. I would not mess up with the motion pad. No matter where the motion pad is going, the motion pad will always stay the same. Let me bring the previous object to view again. This previous object has its motion pad visible, and as you can see, this animation is linear. The keyframes are normal because those dots here tell me that the animation is going in the same speed. If I would select the keyframes, go to my keyframe assistant and easy ease them, you see the spacing between those dots have changed because at first it would go faster, then it would slow down a bit, and it would go again faster near the keyframes. So this is when it comes to basic animation informations. Remember that we have the motion pad and we have static animations. The motion pad can be adjusted, and remember that one time you can animate an object and another time you can animate an entire layer.